Thank you. You don't have to do that. I know.
She pressed the crumpled $10 bill into his weathered hand without looking up from his shoes, because she couldn't bring herself to see his face and still walk away. You don't have to do that, I know. She walked 3 blocks before she stopped. Then she turned around. The man she had just given her last money to was standing exactly where she had left him, folding the bill with the kind of careful precision that had nothing to do with poverty. He wasn't reading it. He was memorizing the serial number. What did Mara Chen see in a homeless man's hands that made her stop on a public sidewalk, in the rain, and stand completely still for 47 seconds? If this is the kind of story that makes you feel something, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without it. Mara Chen had been wearing the same pair of waterproof work boots for 4 years. She knew this because the left sole had started separating at the toe end in October of the previous year, and she had re-glued it twice. Once with construction adhesive she borrowed from a neighbor, and once with epoxy from the hardware store 3 blocks from the laundromat where she spent Sunday mornings. She could tell you exactly how many steps it took from her apartment building's side entrance to the mouth of the Westfield Street underpass 214 if she crossed at the light. 198 if she cut diagonally through the parking structure. She had counted because for the past 19 months that walk was the most reliable part of her day. She was 26 years old and she worked 2 jobs, a Monday through Friday position entering data at a medical billing company called Corrigan Administrative Group, and a Friday through Sunday cashier shift at a grocery warehouse in the Eastport district. Together, those 2 positions paid her $2,340 per month before taxes, after rent, after utilities, after the minimum payment on the credit card she had taken out at 19 to cover a semester of community college she eventually could not finish. She kept approximately $410 free per month for everything else. She had a spreadsheet. She had updated it every Sunday for 3 years. Her mother, Liling Chen, had worked as a seamstress in a garment district factory until her hands developed the kind of persistent nerve damage that made threading a needle feel like pushing a wire through water. After that she cleaned office buildings on the overnight shift, which meant Mara had grown up largely in the company of the small television in their shared bedroom and the 3 plants her mother kept on the windowsill because, she always said, something in the apartment needed to grow. One of the plants was still alive. Mara had kept it in a ceramic pot that had belonged to her grandmother, a pale celadon pot, with a hairline crack running from the lip to the base, old enough that the crack had darkened to the color of old wood. Her grandmother had used it to hold brushes. Her mother had used it to hold a single succulent. Mara used it to hold the same succulent, which had survived 2 apartment moves and 1 winter during which the radiators stopped working for 11 days. She was not given to self-pity, she was given to precision. Those were different things, and it mattered. The reason she did not tell people about the depth of her financial situation was not shame exactly, it was more that she had learned, early and specifically, what people did with that information. When she was 17, she had made the mistake of mentioning to a girl in her high school that her family was behind on rent. By the end of that week, the information had traveled through 3 social groups, acquired details it had never possessed, and arrived back to her in the form of a teacher who asked with elaborate casualness whether she needed to be connected with the school's emergency resource fund. The humiliation of that conversation, the careful gentleness of it, the way the teacher's eyes kept finding a spot just past her left shoulder, had taught Mara something she never unlearned. People received poverty as a problem to be solved or a story to be told, never simply as a fact to be respected. So, she stopped mentioning it. She managed her spreadsheet, and she wore the same boots, and she re-glued the sole when it came apart, and she did not frame any of it as suffering, because, from where she stood, it was just arithmetic. She had met Dominic Reyes 8 months before the morning with the $10 bill at a fundraiser for a neighborhood literacy nonprofit that she had attended only because her coworker Terry had a spare ticket and didn't want to go alone. Dominic was there because one of his portfolio companies had donated to the event, which was the kind of sentence Mara did not understand the full meaning of until much later. What she noticed first was that he was wearing shoes that needed to be retied, and that he did not seem to know this, and what she noticed second was that when the event coordinator asked the room to pair up for a reading activity, he looked around with the expression of someone who genuinely did not have a plan and was fine with that. She ended up across from him at a folding table for 45 minutes, reading aloud to each other from a picture book about a crow who learns to use tools, and she thought he was funny and unperforming in a way that felt rare. He told her he was in investment consulting. She told him she worked in medical billing and covered weekends at a warehouse. He asked which warehouse because his cousin had worked at one in the Eastport district. She told him. He knew it. They talked for another 20 minutes outside on the sidewalk after the event ended, and he asked if she wanted to get coffee sometime. And she said yes because she had said no to enough things and it had not made her less broke. They dated for 6 months before she met his family, which she later understood was a longer delay than usual. She understood it better still the first time she sat in the living room of his mother's house in Greenfield Heights. A house with a fireplace and original hardwood floors and a kitchen that had been renovated within the last 3 years, and watched his mother, Christina Reyes, study the hem of Mara's cardigan with the particular quality of attention that is not about the garment at all. Christina was 61, elegant in a way that seemed to require considerable maintenance. And she had the manner of someone who had long ago decided that the world divided cleanly into people who understood certain things and people who would have to be excused for not understanding them. She greeted Mara with warmth that was indistinguishable from warmth, and asked her questions about her work with the attentiveness of a person who is taking notes rather than listening. When Dominic stepped out of the room to take a phone call, Christina refilled Mara's glass of water and said, "Without looking up from the pitcher, Dominic has always collected interesting people. He has very generous instincts." She said it like a compliment. She said it like a concern. Mara drank her water. She set the glass down with the same steadiness she used when she set down a spreadsheet she had already checked twice. She did not tell Dominic what his mother had said, because she had not yet decided what she thought about it, and she had learned not to hand people problems she had not fully worked out herself. What she noticed in the weeks that followed was that Christina called on Sunday evenings and that Dominic's side of those conversations contained slightly more explanations than it had before. Explanations about where they had been, what they had done, who had paid. She noticed this not because she was keeping track, but because she was the kind of person who noticed patterns in data without trying to. They had been together 10 months when Dominic told her he loved her. He said it on a Tuesday in her apartment's kitchen while she was reheating leftover rice, and it had none of the staging she had expected from someone who coordinated fundraiser donations and wore good shoes. It arrived the way useful things arrive, plainly without decoration. She told him she loved him too, and she meant it with the full weight of her precision, which was the heaviest kind she had. She did not know on that Tuesday evening that the ceramic pot with the celadon glaze and the darkened crack was sitting 12 feet away on her windowsill with its succulent intact, and that it was the most expensive thing in the room. She did not know it because nobody had told her yet. The first time Dominic mentioned Kellen Ward's name, they were at a restaurant that was slightly nicer than their usual places, and Dominic used the tone people use when they are trying to drop something into a conversation without it landing as news. He said Kellen was an old acquaintance from his business school days, that he had recently relocated back to the city, and that he had suggested they all get together sometime. Mara said that sounded fine. She did not think about it again for another 3 weeks. Kellen Ward arrived at their dinner table at a place called Alondra on the first Friday of November, driving a car Mara registered from the window as she waited. A black SUV with a particular slope to the hood that she did not know the make of, but that looked new in the way that only very expensive things look new, where the newness seems structural rather than recent. He was 34, well built in a way that came from attention rather than labor, and he wore a watch that Mara's co-worker Terry later identified when Mara described it as a reference number Patek Philippe that started at $28,000 on the secondary market. He had the social fluency of someone who had never needed to wonder if he was welcome in a room. He shook Mara's hand and said it was great to finally meet her, and then gave his full attention to Dominic for the first 11 minutes in a way that was perfectly calibrated to feel inclusive rather than exclusive. He told a story during the appetizers about a sailing trip he had taken in June, a chartered 48-foot catamaran, 2 weeks off the coast of Croatia, a crew of 4. He told it without particular emphasis, The way people describe things they have done many times, and Mara noticed that Dominic laughed at a moment in the story that was not the punchline. A slightly early laugh, the laugh of someone who wants to signal that he is familiar with this world. She noted it and moved on, by the time the main course arrived. Kellen had pivoted to talking about a real estate development opportunity in the West Side Corridor, a commercial to residential conversion of a 1940s warehouse building, and he mentioned figures with the offhandedness of a man who had decided which numbers were interesting. He mentioned $2 million in projected first-year revenue. He mentioned a pre-existing anchor tenant already committed. He mentioned that he was in conversations with 2 other investors but that the third position was still open, which was why he had wanted to reconnect with Dominic. Mara ate her pasta. She looked at the table and then at Kellen and then at Dominic. Dominic's face had a quality she had not seen there before. Or rather, she had seen it but not directed outward, not visible to other people. It was the face of someone who is measuring the distance between where they are and where they want to be and finding the gap more distressing than usual. She asked Kellen what his background was in real estate development specifically. He said he had managed a portfolio of mixed-use properties in 3 markets over the past decade. She asked him which markets. He named 2 cities and a regional area that was broad enough to cover a great deal of territory. She asked who the anchor tenant was. He smiled, a real smile, not a deflecting one, and said he appreciated direct questions and that he was not at liberty to name the tenant until the deal closed, for confidentiality reasons, but that he would be happy to share the documentation once they were in formal discussions. She nodded. She had spent 19 months doing data entry on insurance claims, which meant she had a very clear sense of what properly structured documentation looked like and what it looked like when it was constructed to feel like documentation without containing the things documentation was supposed to contain. She said nothing else about it that evening. In the parking lot afterward, walking to the car, Dominic said, "What did you think of him?" And the way he asked it told her that whatever she thought of Kellen Ward, Dominic had already decided something. She said he seemed confident. Dominic said he was one of the sharpest people he had met in a long time. She said she would reserve judgment until she could look at the actual project numbers. Dominic said, "That's very you," and it was not unkind, but it was the first time he had said something like that in a way that felt like a category rather than an observation. In the following 6 weeks, Kellen Ward appeared 4 more times. Once for drinks after work on a Wednesday, which Mara could not attend because of her Saturday shift and the need to sleep. Once at a birthday dinner for one of Dominic's colleagues, where Kellen arrived with a woman Mara did not catch the name of, but who wore a coat that cost more than Mara's monthly rent. Once at a casual Sunday gathering at a house in the Hill District that turned out to belong to Kellen himself, a 3-story brownstone with a chef's kitchen and a garden that had been landscaped professionally and recently. And once at a drinks event that Dominic attended without mentioning it to Mara until 2 days afterward. She did not make an argument about the drinks event. She marked it. What she observed over those 6 weeks was a specific shift in Dominic, not in his feelings toward her, not yet, but in the register he applied to their shared life. He started noticing things he had not previously noticed. He mentioned more than once that their neighborhood had limited parking. He mentioned a friend whose apartment in the Meridian building had a rooftop terrace. He mentioned, once and only once, that Kellen's firm had office space in the Delworth Tower building downtown and that the monthly rent per square foot was lower than it sounded given the client optics. He had never previously used the phrase client optics. Mara updated her spreadsheet on the Sunday of the 3rd week and sat for a moment looking at the column she had titled Simply Notes, which she used for things that did not fit elsewhere. She typed 3 words into it, pattern, not incident. Then she closed the spreadsheet and went to re-water the succulent in the celadon pot, which was dropping 2 leaves per week and needed better drainage. Christina Reyes had begun calling more frequently, not just Sunday evenings now, but sometimes midweek, and sometimes after the kind of social event that Dominic and Kellen had attended together. The nature of what Christina said to Dominic during these calls was something Mara knew only from the downstream effects. Dominic, the following morning, mentioning that his mother had pointed out a particular restaurant neighborhood that was coming up, or noting that a mutual family friend had just listed his apartment in the Westfield building and asking whether Mara had any interest in seeing it. She always had the same answer, not right now, and he always accepted this, but the space between her answer and his acceptance had grown by perhaps a second and a half over the previous month, and she was precise enough to have noticed. Christina had said something to her privately at a Sunday lunch 6 weeks after Kellen's arrival. Dominic had gone to the garden to take a call, and Christina had passed the bread basket and said, without any change in her pleasant expression, "I wonder sometimes if Dominic holds himself back for the people he loves. He has always been that way. Very loyal. Sometimes to a fault." She paused. Not everyone deserves that level of accommodation, of course. That's not a criticism of anyone. It's just something a mother notices. Mara took a piece of bread. She set it on her plate. She said, "Dominic is one of the most thoughtful people I know." Christina agreed warmly. They did not discuss it further. But 3 days later, Dominic came home from a dinner she had not been invited to. A dinner that included Kellen and 2 other investors and, as she learned incidentally, Christina herself, and he was quieter than usual, and when she asked how it had gone he said, "Good, we talked about the West Side project a lot. Kellen thinks I'd be a strong equity partner if I wanted in." She asked how much. He said the entry position was $380,000. She did not say anything immediately. He said, "I know I don't have that liquid right now, but Kellen thinks there are ways to structure it." She asked what kind of ways. He said he wasn't sure yet, that they were still in early conversations. She said she thought he should get a lawyer to look at any structure before he agreed to anything. He said, "Right, yeah." And she could tell from the specific quality of that response that he had already made a decision and was looking for a particular kind of support, not the kind she had offered. She lay awake that night for a long time, looking at the ceiling, thinking about the 17-year-old version of herself sitting in a teacher's office being looked at with careful gentleness. And she thought about what she knew and what she did not yet know and what she was going to need to find out. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and wrote a message to a number she had not used in almost 2 years. "Elena, I need your help with something. Can we talk this week?" Elena Vasquez Park had been Mara's supervisor at a research firm where Mara had worked briefly before the medical billing position, and she was the most methodical person Mara had ever met. Methodical in the way of someone who had made peace with the idea that the world yielded to patience and documentation more reliably than to urgency. She had left the firm to start her own forensic accounting practice 18 months prior, which Mara had seen in a brief professional update and stored the way she stored anything useful. Elena texted back at 6:47 the following morning, "Call me at noon." Mara went to work. She entered 214 steps worth of insurance data. She ate lunch at her desk and called Elena at noon exactly. She was running towards something she did not have full names for yet. She could feel the shape of it the way you feel a hairline crack under your fingertip, not sharp yet, but present, and spreading. The morning Mara found the documents was a Saturday in late December, 11 days before Christmas, which she remembered afterward not because of the holiday proximity, but because Dominic had left early for a breakfast meeting and she had stayed home to catch up on billing work she had brought from the office, and she was sitting at the desk in the second bedroom, the room they used as a shared office, when she leaned over to reach the printer and knocked Dominic's laptop bag from its hook, and it fell open. The folder slid out onto the floor face up. It was a standard manila folder, the kind from the office supply store 4 blocks from the grocery warehouse, and it had nothing written on the tab. She picked it up to put it back. The edge of a document extended past the fold, not enough to read, just enough to notice that the header contained a logo she recognized, Valley Credit Partners, which was a private lending institution that she had processed several medical billing third-party claims for and whose letterhead she could identify from across a room. She set the folder on the desk. She sat down. She opened it. There were 11 pages inside. The first was a loan application, a personal loan application, signed by Dominic, dated 6 weeks prior, for $320,000. The stated purpose in the field marked Purpose of Funds was Investment Partnership Entry, West Side Corridor Project, Ward Capital Group LLC. She turned to the second page, which was a credit approval letter. The loan had been approved. The funds had been dispersed. She checked the disbursement date 14 days ago. She sat with this for a moment. She turned to page 4. Page 4 was a partnership agreement, 7 pages long, dense with the specific kind of language that is designed to feel like clarity while functioning as its opposite. She had enough experience with insurance documentation to know how to find the operative clauses beneath the structural noise, and it took her 8 minutes to locate the two that mattered. The first was a clause specifying that the limited partner Dominic would contribute $320,000 in capital in exchange for a 12% equity stake in the West Side Corridor development project. The second was a clause, buried in Section 7, specifying that the general partner, Ward Capital Group LLC, represented by Kellen Ward, retained sole discretionary authority over all capital deployment decisions, with limited partners having no voting rights and no claim on principal in the event of project restructuring. She read Section 7 3 times. It meant, in plain language, that if Kellen Ward decided to restructure the project, which could mean anything he chose it to mean, Dominic's $320,000 was gone and there was no legal mechanism to recover it. She set the document down, she picked up her phone, she called Elena. "I need you to run Ward Capital Group LLC, she said, and Kellen Ward personally. And I need you to look at a partnership agreement that has a Section 7 that I think is designed to disappear someone's money." Elena said, "Send me photos of every page. Give me 48 hours. Mara photographed all 11 pages. She put the folder back in the laptop bag. She hung the bag back on its hook. She went back to her desk and opened her billing work and entered data for the next 2 hours without stopping. When Dominic came home that afternoon, she said nothing. He seemed relaxed, more relaxed than he had been in weeks, and he made dinner and they ate together and he talked about the breakfast meeting which had been about something unrelated to Kellen. And she listened to him and responded and watched his face and tried to hold both versions of him in her attention at once. The person who had said "I love you" over reheated rice on a Tuesday, and the person who had borrowed $320,000 from a private lender without telling her, and given it to a man whose partnership agreement had a clause in Section 7 that she was not sure he had read. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. Elena called back in 36 hours rather than 48, which told Mara the situation before Elena said a word. Ward Capital Group LLC was registered in Delaware 14 months ago, Elena said. Before that, Kellen Ward ran 2 other entities, Meridian Capital Partners and Crestview Development Group. Both dissolved within 24 months of formation. Meridian Capital Partners was the subject of a civil suit in 2019 by 3 limited partners alleging undisclosed material conflicts of interest and improper deployment of capital. The suit settled, the terms are sealed, but I found the original complaint in the county court filing system. The plaintiffs collectively lost $740,000. Mara sat very still. She was at her kitchen table. The Celadon pot was on the windowsill behind her. "There's more," Elena said. "I pulled the West Side Corridor property records. The building Kellen has been representing as the project site was sold 8 months ago. It's under a different ownership entity now, one that has no connection to Ward Capital Group LLC. The project as described in the partnership agreement Dominic signed does not exist. It has no anchor tenant, no development permits, no connection to the building. The address in the agreement goes to a parking lot." Mara said, "How much has he raised?" Elena paused. "Based on what I can trace through the LLC filings and cross-referencing the asset movement, I estimate he has raised between $1 million and $1. $4 million from at least 4 separate investors over the past 9 months. Mara said, "Is Dominic the only one who hasn't read Section 7? Elena said, quietly, "He's not the only one." She stared at the surface of her kitchen table. It was a table she had bought secondhand for $45 from a listing in her neighborhood's community board newsletter. And she had sanded 2 of its legs because they were uneven, and she had eaten every meal she cooked at it for the past 22 months. She thought about all the spreadsheets she had updated at that table. She thought about the $410 per month she allowed herself for everything. "I need you to document everything," she said. "Every filing, every property record, every connection you can find between the dissolved entities and the current LLC. I need it in a form that can be handed to a lawyer and then to a financial crimes investigator." "Already started," Elena said. "There's something else." Elena paused. "I looked at Christina Reyes." Mara said nothing. "Christina Reyes has had lunch with Kellen Ward on 4 occasions in the past 3 months. I found this because she tagged a location on a social media post, and his name is in a comment on the same post, and because one of the restaurants shows up in a business expense record from an LLC he controls that I found in a linked filing. I don't know what they discussed. But she was not introduced to him through Dominic. The timeline is wrong. She knew him before Dominic did. Mara set her phone on the table. She kept it on speaker. She looked at the window. Christina had said, Dominic has always been that way, very loyal, sometimes to a fault. She picked the phone back up. How long until you have a complete package, she said. 14 days, Elena said. If you can get me the original signed agreement, I can move faster. I'll get it. Mara, Elena's voice was careful. Are you going to be all right in the meantime? Yes, Mara said. I'm going to be precise. She did not confront Dominic. She did not confront Christina. She went to work on Monday and entered data, and she went to the grocery warehouse on Friday and worked her shift, and she came home on Sunday and watered the succulent and updated her spreadsheet and added a new column titled simply Ward Capital, in which she began entering every piece of information Elena sent her. Elena had a contact, a woman named Dr. Rachel Son, who had spent 11 years at a state financial crimes unit before moving into private forensic consulting. Elena brought Dr. Son into the process at the end of the first week, and the three of them had a call that lasted an hour and 40 minutes, during which Dr. Son asked Mara questions about the partnership agreement's clauses with the specificity of someone who had seen the same construction before and knew exactly where to look for the load-bearing deceptions. The Section 7 language is a variant of a structure I've seen in 4 other cases, Dr. Son said. The variation is designed to make it unambiguous enough to enforce as a contract while keeping the enforcement mechanism invisible to a non-lawyer reading it for the first time. It's not an accident, it's a design. Mara said, Can you tie Kellen Ward directly to the Meridian Capital case? Dr. Son said, Not directly through the sealed settlement. But I have a former plaintiff's attorney from that case who has agreed to provide a general statement about the structural similarities between that scheme and current patterns we are identifying. That's enough to support a referral to a financial crimes investigator. Elena, on the same call, said, I've also been looking at the money movement inside Ward Capital Group LLC. There's a pattern of disbursements to a shell entity in Nevada that I want to trace further. The Nevada entity is called Whitmore Consulting, and it has the same registered agent as a third LLC that Kellen Ward has a tangential connection to. Mara wrote Whitmore Consulting in the Ward Capital column of her spreadsheet. She wrote the Nevada registered agent name and the name of the third LLC underneath it. How many total investors do we believe are currently exposed, she said. At least 5, Elena said. Possibly 7. I'm still mapping the network. 5 people, potentially 7. At an average of somewhere between $250,000 and $380,000 per position. Mara did the arithmetic in her head in the time it took Elena to finish the sentence that was between $1, $25 million and $2, $66 million in exposed capital moving toward a shell entity in Nevada while Kellen Ward attended dinners and told stories about chartered catamarans and wore a watch that started at $28,000 on the secondary market. She stayed on the call for another 40 minutes. When it ended, she sat for a while at her $45 secondhand table and thought about Dominic's face during that dinner at Alondra when Kellen had mentioned the anchor tenant he couldn't name, the way Dominic had accepted the explanation without pressing it, the way he had wanted the story to be true more than he had wanted to verify it. She did not feel contempt for him. She felt something more structural than contempt, something closer to the recognition of a load-bearing weakness in a plan. She thought about whether to tell him. She almost did, 3 times. The first was a Thursday evening when he came home tired and sat down next to her on the couch and leaned his head back and closed his eyes and said, Kellen wants to do a dinner next month. Something bigger, he's talking about doing it at the Meridian Club. Some of his other investor partners will be there. She almost said, Do you know what Whitmore Consulting is? She did not. She said, That sounds like a nice venue. He said, Yeah, the second time was a Saturday morning when he found the loan payment that had been drafted automatically from their shared account. They had merged finances partially 4 months prior, and he seemed startled by the amount, and for a moment she saw him run the numbers in his head, and she thought he might arrive at the same place she had arrived at 2 weeks earlier. He looked at her. She looked back. He said, It's a lot, but the return structure should cover it within 18 months. She said you should make sure you understand the terms of the return structure. He said I trust Kellen. She said I know. And she went to make coffee. The third time was when she overheard him on a phone call. She was in the hallway, he was in the office, the door was open, telling someone in a lower voice than usual that yes, he had gotten in on the West Side project. That the terms were solid, that he had done his research. She heard pride in his voice, and underneath it she heard the thing that lives under pride when pride has not yet been tested. A need for it to be true that was indistinguishable from certainty. She went back to the kitchen. She updated the spreadsheet. She wrote a message to Elena. Do we have enough for a referral yet? Elena's reply came 4 minutes later, 6 more days. San is finishing the entity mapping. The Nevada connection is almost fully traced. Mara typed back, Kellen is planning an investor dinner at the Meridian Club next month. All partners present. A longer pause. Then, when exactly? She checked the date Dominic had mentioned, 3rd Saturday of January. Elena replied, that gives us 3 weeks and 2 days from today. We'll be ready. She set her phone down on the kitchen table. She looked at the celadon pot on the windowsill. The succulent had dropped another leaf in the last week, and she had transferred it to a slightly larger vessel to improve the drainage, but she had kept the ceramic pot on the sill because it belonged there. Because her grandmother had set it there and her mother had kept it there, and she had carried it through 2 apartment moves wrapped in a dish towel, and it was the kind of thing you did not move simply because circumstances required reorganization. She was not afraid. She was waiting, which was different and harder. What she did not know yet, what she had not allowed herself to map in the spreadsheet because mapping it would mean deciding what to do with it, was whether Dominic's involvement was purely the result of having been deceived or whether there was something else in the transaction she had not yet seen. She had looked at the evidence from every available angle. She had found no indication that he had known. She was 91% sure. She was precise enough to know that 91% was not 100%, and she was disciplined enough to hold the remaining 9% without letting it collapse prematurely into either direction. She had 6 more days. She went to the grocery warehouse on Friday. She entered data on Monday. She wrote nothing in the notes column of her spreadsheet for the rest of that week, because everything she needed to say was already there. The Meridian Club occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Halcourt Avenue that had been a private members' institution for 81 years, and it had the quality of places that have hosted enough consequential conversations to have developed a physical atmosphere suited to them: high ceilings, low music, the particular smell of old wood and recent polish. The event was billed, on the invitation Dominic had shown Mara 3 weeks prior, as an investor appreciation dinner for Ward Capital Group, and it had a guest list of 18 people, which meant it was large enough to feel social and small enough for every word to be audible to everyone who needed to hear it. Mara had confirmed with Elena 2 days before that the package was complete: the entity mapping, the Nevada connection, the Meridian Capital case parallels, the timeline of Christina Reyes's prior acquaintance with Kellen Ward. The property records showing the West Side Corridor building had been sold 8 months before Dominic signed a partnership agreement for a development project on its address. Dr. San had submitted a formal referral to the State Financial Crimes Unit 48 hours earlier. The assigned investigator had asked Elena to make a specific individual available at a specific time and location, which Elena had arranged through a contact at the Meridian Club's management, a former client who had done forensic accounting work with Elena's firm the previous year. Mara had also, that same morning, done the one thing she had been holding back for 3 weeks. She had told Dominic. Not everything, not in the order that would allow him time to process and then to panic and then to do something before the dinner that would make the situation more complex. She had told him enough. She had sat with him at the kitchen table and placed the photographed documents in front of him, printed now, in order, and she had walked him through Section 7 and the property records and the Meridian Capital case. She had watched his face move through a sequence of expressions she did not try to name because naming them would have reduced them, and at the end she said, "I'm not asking you to trust my judgment over yours. I'm asking you to look at what I can show you and decide for yourself." He looked at it for a long time. He did not speak for 6 minutes, which she had counted not from anxiety but from respect. because 6 minutes of looking at something difficult without filling it with words was not a small thing. He said, "How long have you known?" She said, "Elena began documenting it 22 days ago." He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She said, "Because I needed the documentation to be complete before you could make a decision with full information. If I had told you earlier, you might have confronted him, and confronting him would have given him time to restructure the entities and move the funds. I was not protecting myself. I was protecting you." Another silence. "Longer," he said, "my mother." She said, "Yes, she did not add anything to that." He sat for another few minutes. Then he said, "What happens tonight?" She said, "The assigned investigator and 2 members of their unit will be present at the dinner. Elena will be present. I need you to attend as you would normally attend. I need you not to signal anything to Kellen beforehand." He looked at her. She looked back. He said, "Mara," then he did not finish the sentence. She said, "I know." The dinner began at 7:00. Kellen Ward was already present when they arrived, standing near the entrance to the main dining room in a suit that fit the way expensive suits fit, like a decision rather than a garment. And he greeted Dominic with the warm ease of a man who had not been running a Ponzi-adjacent scheme for 14 months, and he greeted Mara with a slightly warmer ease than usual, which she understood was a recalibration. He had recently become more interested in Dominic's relationship stability, which meant he had recently become more interested in her. "Mara," he said, "I'm glad you came tonight. I feel like we haven't gotten enough time to talk," she said. "I've been looking forward to this." He smiled. He had excellent teeth. The room filled over the next 30 minutes. There were 12 confirmed investors present, along with 4 guests and 2 staff members from Ward Capital Group who circulated with quiet efficiency. Christina Reyes was seated at the far end of the table. She had, Mara saw, been placed next to a woman named Diane, who was the partner of one of Kellen's larger investors, and they were already in an easy conversation that suggested familiarity. Christina glanced at Mara when she sat down and offered a small, precise smile. Mara smiled back with equal precision. The first course was served. Kellen stood and delivered a brief welcoming statement about the West Side Corridor project's progress, construction timeline, projected completion, anchor tenant whose name he was, he said with a practiced pause and a half grin, not quite ready to announce publicly just yet, but who was significant enough that when the name became public it would, he was confident. Changed the room's understanding of the project's value. 3 seats down from Mara, a man named Gerald, one of the investors whose name she had found in Elena's documentation, nodded with the expression of someone who has already spent money and is working hard to believe it was wise. Elena Vasquez Park was seated at a side table near the room's east entrance with a man Mara did not know, but who wore the particular careful plainness of someone whose professional appearance is a tool. At 8:14, while the second course was being cleared, the man next to Elena stood. He walked to the center of the room. He waited until the ambient conversation reached a natural break. Then he said, calmly and clearly, that his name was Detective Sergeant Mark Itura, assigned to the state's Financial Crimes Investigation Unit, and that he was present this evening in connection with a formal investigation into Ward Capital Group LLC, its registered officers, and certain associated entities. The room did not go silent the way rooms go silent in films, with a single dramatic drop. It went silent the way rooms go silent when the information arriving is complex enough that the automatic social response, filling space, fails to load in time. Kellen Ward's expression moved through approximately 3 things in about 2 seconds. The third one settled into a composure that was nearly convincing. "I'm sure there's a misunderstanding," he said. His voice was even. "It was," Mara noticed. "Very good." Detective Itura said, "Mr. Ward, the investigation has been ongoing for 31 days and involves formal documentation of activity across 3 registered entities, including Whitmore Consulting LLC of Nevada, and encompasses a referral from a certified forensic accounting specialist." He paused. "This is not a misunderstanding." Christina Reyes said, from the far end of the table, "This is entirely inappropriate." Her voice had the particular quality of someone used to defining the terms of a room. "Whatever concerns exist, they should be addressed through proper channels. Not, Mrs. Reyes," Detective Itura said. Without turning, "I would appreciate if you remained available for a brief, separate conversation this evening as well." Christina's voice stopped. Kellen took one step backward. It was not a large step. He had not made a decision yet. He was in the phase where the choices still felt like they existed. He said, "I want to speak with my attorney." "You're welcome to do that," Detective Atura said. "You'll have the opportunity. At the moment, I'm asking everyone in this room to remain seated." Kellen looked across the table. He looked at Dominic. And then his gaze moved to Mara. She had thought about this moment, not with satisfaction, not with the thing that feels like victory, but with the plain attention she gave to any problem she had worked toward resolving. She looked back at him. He had asked her, at Alondra 4 months prior, whether she was the kind of person who reserved judgment. She had said yes. She had been accurate. "You pressed a $10 bill into my hand," he said. And his voice was different now. The social fluency had dropped a layer, and underneath it was something harder and less prepared. "Outside the fundraiser. Before you even knew who I was." He stopped. The room was fully attentive. "Do you know what I thought?" she said. "I imagine you thought it confirmed something about the distance between us." He said nothing. She said, "That's what it was supposed to do." "I had $10 left in my wallet, and I needed to know whether you would look at me differently if you thought I had nothing. Because the investment conversation was already happening. Because your documentation had already come to my attention. Because I needed to see your face when someone you had decided was below the transaction handed you money you didn't need." She had handed him the bill on the sidewalk outside the Meridian Club's sister event, a January fundraiser she had attended with Dominic. She had seen Kellen arrive on foot, his driver had dropped him a block away, and she had manufactured a circumstance. She had chosen the amount deliberately, enough to register as real generosity from someone with visible resource constraints, not enough to be suspicious. He had taken it. He had said, "You don't have to do that." He had kept it. He was still looking at her. The room was still. She said, "You kept it. I wanted to see whether you would." Dominic, sitting next to her, exhaled a long, quiet breath and did not say anything. Detective Atura moved toward Kellen. He said, "Mr. Ward, at this point I need to inform you formally," and the room shifted from a dinner into something else, and the transition was not dramatic the way transitions are in stories. It was procedural. It had the quality of a machine that had been waiting to run, reaching the moment when someone pressed the switch. Ward Capital Group LLC was formally suspended by the state's Commercial Affairs Bureau within 9 days of the Meridian Club dinner. The suspension froze all active accounts and triggered an automatic review of the 3 registered entities connected to the LLC, including Whitmore Consulting of Nevada, which held $617,000 in transferred funds that the investigation identified as improperly moved from investor capital. That money was placed under a preservation order while the case was built. The forensic accounting documentation that Elena and Dr. Son had assembled covered 187 pages and included entity maps, property records, wire transfer logs, and parallel case comparisons. Dr. Son submitted a supplemental expert statement to the investigating unit on the 14th day. The state's Financial Crimes Unit opened a formal prosecution case on day 21. Kellen Ward retained an attorney within hours of the dinner. He retained a second attorney 4 days later. The first attorney had indicated, in a communication Elena learned of through Dr. Son's investigator contact, that Kellen's initial position was to dispute the characterization of Section 7 as deceptive, and to argue that all investors had accepted the terms knowingly. The forensic documentation dismantled this argument at 3 levels. The property records proved the development project was non-existent at the time of signing, which meant the partnership agreement was not a legitimate investment contract but a fraudulent inducement. The parallel Meridian Capital case structure demonstrated a pattern of deliberate design. And the Nevada entity revealed a mechanism for extracting and concealing funds that had no legitimate business explanation. Kellen's first attorney withdrew from the case on day 30. His second attorney filed a motion to limit the scope of discovery, which the court denied. The Whitmore Consulting entity was tied, through Dr. Son's supplemental work, to a 4th LLC registered in Wyoming under a name that took 17 days to surface, Alderton Property Services. Alderton had received 2 wire transfers totaling $212,000 from Whitmore in the 14 months since Ward Capital Group was formed. The registered agent for Alderton Property Services was a paralegal firm in Scottsdale. The beneficial owner, surfaced through a beneficial ownership reporting requirement that Elena had known to invoke, was a trust in the name of a person Mara had not expected to find, a woman named Helena Reyes, who was Christina Reyes's younger sister, and who resided in a city 1,200 miles away and had, as far as anyone could determine, never had any direct contact with Kellen Ward. The money had not been moving toward Kellen, it had been moving through him. Christina Reyes was interviewed formally by the investigation unit on day 11. She arrived with her own attorney. The interview lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. What emerged, over the following 2 weeks through document review and the interview record, was a relationship that had not been disclosed to anyone. Christina Reyes and Kellen Ward had been introduced through a mutual contact 18 months before the Alondra dinner, and Christina had facilitated Kellen's introduction to Dominic and to Dominic's existing professional network in exchange for an arrangement whose specific terms were part of the ongoing investigation. The $212,000 in Alderton Property Services in Helena Reyes's trust represented, the investigation concluded, Christina's share of the investor capital that had been funneled through the Nevada entity. She had introduced her son to a fraud, and then she had called on Sunday evenings to make sure he stayed in it. Dominic sat with this for a long time. Mara did not rush him. He said on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the dinner, 7 days after the Christina connection had been formally confirmed, that he did not know how to hold it. She said she thought that was the right response to something that did not have a shape you could hold all at once. He said, "She introduced me to him." Mara said, "Yes," he said, "she knew." She said, "The investigation's conclusion is yes." He looked at his hands on the kitchen table, her $45 table, sanded and uneven and bearing every meal she had made in 22 months. And he did not cry, but there was something in his face that was the structural equivalent of it. She put her hand on the table near his, not on his hand, near it, because she was precise. The 5 confirmed investors, 7 had been the final count, had collectively deposited $47 million into Ward Capital Group's accounts. The preservation order on the Whitmore Consulting Funds and the seizure of identifiable assets connected to Kellen Ward's other entities recovered a total of $894,000 over the following months. The remaining gap, $576,000, was the subject of ongoing civil proceedings by the investor group, of which Dominic was a member. His $320,000 was not fully recoverable in the short term, but the civil case had sufficient standing to pursue partial recovery across a multi-year timeline. Mara's co-worker Terry, who had given her the spare ticket to the literacy fundraiser 20 months earlier, asked Mara once what it had been like, the whole thing. Mara thought about how to answer. She said it had been like updating a spreadsheet on a problem that kept adding new columns, and you had to be patient enough not to close it before all the data was in. Terry said, "That's very you." And it was, and this time it was simply an observation. Elena Vasquez Park had said something to Mara during their first call in those 19 days of document assembly that had stayed with her, that the most reliable indicator she had found in 11 years of financial crimes work of whether a scheme would eventually collapse was not the sophistication of the structure, but the quality of the record-keeping. Complex schemes rarely failed because of a single dramatic exposure. They failed because the people running them believed that controlling information was the same as owning it, and they were always wrong. Mara had thought about this. She had thought about it in relation to the $410 per month she had allowed herself for 3 years, and the spreadsheet she had updated every Sunday, and the Celadon pot on the windowsill that she had carried through 2 moves wrapped in a dish towel, and the 7-year-old version of herself watching her mother thread a needle with hands that were just beginning to hurt, and the precision with which her mother had done it anyway, not because it wasn't painful, but because the thing being made required it. The object her grandmother had used to hold brushes, the object her mother had used to hold a plant, the object she had carried and watered and kept because something in the apartment needed to grow, and because some things pass from hand to hand not as inheritance but as instruction. She had thought, on the sidewalk outside the Meridian Club's sister event, pressing a crumpled $10 bill into Kellen Ward's hand, about what it felt like to give away the last thing you had to see what someone else was made of. She had done it without hesitation. She had walked 3 blocks and stopped and turned around because she had wanted to see whether he would still be standing there folding it, memorizing it, or whether he would have already moved on. He had been standing exactly where she left him. That had told her something she already suspected, confirmed in a way that only a concrete observation can confirm a pattern. He was the kind of person who counted things that were not his. If this story stayed with you, it's probably not because of the ending. Endings are just the last data point. It stayed with you because of the part in the middle, the part where someone decides to wait and document and hold a 9% uncertainty without letting it collapse in either direction. Because the truth requires the full accounting, not the convenient one. That is not patience in the passive sense. That is precision applied to something that matters. If you're watching this and you are currently holding a situation that has not yet reached its full shape, a relationship that is changing in ways you cannot quite name, a number that does not add up, a Sunday evening phone call with a quality that is not warmth but resembles it, then you already know what the spreadsheet is for. You already know that the ceramic pot does not get left behind just because circumstances require reorganization. Everything she had at the beginning of this story was $10 and a pair of re-glued boots and a precise enough mind to know the difference between a pattern and an incident. That was not nothing. In the end, it turned out to be enough. We tell stories like this one every week. Stories about people who had every reason to look the other way and chose not to. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and share it with someone you know who understands the value of keeping good records. Have you ever had to choose between staying quiet and speaking up? And how did you know when the time was right? Tell us below.